circus on here or not?
Uh, I just pressed record, so no, I don't think so. I think it's a bit too late for him. If we wanted to do that, that would have been more
Well, it's
ish.
9 o'clock. Okay, let's try to start getting him on some of these. There's an awful lot of news out there,
Mm-hmm.
and one of the things that's bothering me the most is that I'm a very, very protagonist for the Trump administration.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to the Middle East, especially Israel, which is my specialty, I was thinking that in the very beginning, he had the weight to force people to do things. Well, he
Mm-hmm.
hasn't been able to force Ukraine to do anything. He hasn't been able to force Britain to do anything. He hasn't been able to force Netanyahu to do anything. And honestly, he hasn't been able to force Saudi Arabia with all the promises of deals to do everything. The
Mm-hmm.
only one which is going along with him is another guy who's senile, and that he's giving a pass to. I don't mind that he's giving a pass to the guy, and that's Erdogan.
Mm-hmm.
And the one that's trying, the people that keep trying to humor him, but they understand him by now, is Russia. So it seems that there is a separate non-governmental bracket of people not in the government, with Dimitrov on the Russian side and Witkoff and Kushner on the American side, and they're all thinking almost identically.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have Tom Barrack that's trying to manage both Turkey and the Gulf, and his ideas are excellent. I agree with almost everything he's doing. But again, what we are seeing, and it was a very alarming article last night by Guy Shai, who is one of the heads of Israeli aircraft industry, and this is a point which I think goes across almost the entire spectrum of U.S. relations, maybe not in South America, but certainly in Europe and certainly in the Middle East, which most of the podcasts that I'm on discuss. I know when I'm not here, you guys stay away from the Middle East.
Mm-hmm. Not
Um,
necessarily.
but, mostly.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of silliness going on. Trump cannot put his foot down with Netanyahu. Now, the article last night said, it's in the Times of Israel, that Trump wants Turkey to have the F-35s, which is logical. The agreement that Israel has, both when it comes to Turkey, when it comes to Saudi Arabia, and almost anybody else. I'm not sure about the Emirates because the Emirates is now basically full partners with Israel. But for anybody else in the region, is that Israel will have a qualitative and quantitative edge, including being able to put on extra software that they develop themselves that neither Turkey nor the Gulf is able to do. But that's not good enough. So the article says Trump thinks he's the president from a mansion in Florida. Israel will get Washington to prevent it from happening. Now,
Well,
I'm very concerned about that statement.
mm. Well,
Uh,
I think Israel's days in the halls of power in Washington D.C. are numbered because of this.
yes and no. Yes and no. Not for the moment. I mean, what the guy is saying, and there is some truth to this, because he's talking about Israel. I want to do what's good for Israel, by the way. Some of the stuff that's happened and come out in the last 72 hours makes my hair stand up.
Mm.
But what he is saying also represents the Cuban lobby. It also represents the Venezuelan lobby. And indirectly, it represents the Ukraine lobby. So what he is saying is that the long-term relationships with the permanent administrative state, particularly the War Department, and I like that idea, War Department. I don't believe in
Oh, it's same
defense.
here.
Okay, the
And you'll
War
get less
Department,
wars with the War Department because people actually understand where
right?
defense means that.
Yeah, no, it's complete doublespeak of the end of World War II. It's kind of I call it passive imperialism. Is that's it?
Yeah.
So with the War Department, the State Department, and the other structures of the administrative state, which includes Congress, you can basically stymie what Robert Woodward coined the imperial presidency. Well, in reality, the last time there was an imperial presidency was under Franklin Roosevelt. There has been no imperial presidency since Franklin Roosevelt. Truman was able to ride that wave for approximately uh, 3 years. And at the end of the Korean War, that was the end of the imperial presidency. The closest that one came to having the imperial presidency was not Richard Nixon, but Lyndon Baines Johnson.
Yeah.
So,
I would argue that wasn't close to. It was.
Yeah. When you are the master of the Senate, you can get away with a lot of stuff. And when you tie that with being president of the United States.
So, I think it's an important article to read. Not saying that Israel's days are numbered or that the Cuban lobby's days are numbered.
I think their influence in the halls of Washington, D.C. are numbered. I think Israel will be fine. They'll get another.
It depends which. Well, Israel is not fine under the current government, but that's a separate discussion. The problem that I'm seeing, and this is a universal thing, is that when people say the MAGA people are not happy and this person is not happy and that person is not happy, the Israelis know better. At the end of the day, it's the arms contractors. Notice I say arms contractors, not defense contractors. It is the arms contractors, the other financial situations. Israel's done something extremely smart, by the way. I can't believe they've done one thing, though, which is brilliant, which most Israelis go right over their head, or most supporters of Israel. I won't even say Israelis, because what's on social media has very little to do, I've discovered, with what's going on in the real world. So, and the Ukrainians have discovered this in Canada also, and London always keeps coming back. If we ever get Tom on here, maybe Halsey, we can discuss this. In that this permanent administrative state, which is a combination of financial, what some of us pejoratively refer to as City of London, arms, and enforcement, is not controlled by Congress either. Congress is simply a voting channel. A lot of people say, well, Israel is a democracy. The government has to do what the cabinet wants. Well, I don't believe in that. When it comes to foreign policy, I don't believe in democracy, and I don't believe in cabinets and coalitions. And if you don't like that, well, too bad. Because when you allow democracy and allow all these mediocres in there, you screw up your foreign policy. And I think any of the great foreign policy people in Europe over the years would agree. But also, I'm sure Thomas Jefferson would have agreed the same. I think Metternich would never have even thought about having some parliamentary blabberers conducting foreign policy. The same with Westphalia. The same with any of them. I mean, if you asked Benjamin Disraeli or Lord Palmerston, I mean, they would just laugh their heads off at this type of nonsense. And if you really want to go, and then we're really reaching very, very dangerous territory. If you want to see how different parliamentary groups in London kept seesawing towards the German government, it ended up with a war that might not have happened. See, so all this parliamentary stuff doesn't work very well. And I would say also that is the complaint that you have in Turkey about Erdogan that's taken over the show. Now, the problem with Erdogan and with Netanyahu is they're too old. And they don't have their capacities. Very few people in their 80s had their capacities being to
just
control.
Look at all the Soviet Union. The reason why Gorbachev was able to run around all those people who were drunk in their 80s was because he was in his 40s. And that's what we're seeing now with the West is we're going through our gerontocracy phase. Much as I
Oh,
like Trump,
absolutely.
he's also up
Absolutely.
there.
Well, this is the problem with Netanyahu. I mean, Netanyahu had some fantastic people to carry his baton while he would go into a mode of senior statesman. Probably the most egregious of all these people was Mahathir Mohamad in Malaysia, who thought that 100 years old he could keep ruling. I mean, it's ludicrous.
Yeah, you have
And
to
I
pass the
don't think,
baton to someone else, or you end up like in the Angela Merkel situation where she never developed an heir, and now you have a bozo like Franklin what Maris running this job with 9,000 Germans in prisons for criticizing him.
well, but I mean, Mertz is horrible. He should not, I'm not saying he's horrible. He's a BlackRock guy. He's a financial guy. He cannot do that job whatsoever. And all he knows about is war, 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 because BlackRock has come to the conclusion that the European economy is so bad that unless you do Keynesianism on steroids, and that's what I find interesting about all these governmental structures. Whether you hear this blabbering about libertarianism and the market, of which Millet is none, on one side, or on the other side, on the left, it all ends up with profligate Keynesianism. Well, before John Maynard Keynes ever existed, the Romans drove themselves into the ground doing exactly the same thing, except they didn't use the name Keynes. So BlackRock understands for Europe to survive and not completely collapse, they need Keynesianism.
Well, I
And that's
disagree.
military
I don't think
Keynesianism.
they need Keynesianism. I think they need to just face the bankruptcy. And when you face the bankruptcy,
Well, that for you and I to say that, that's very easy. Are we? How many stakeholders do we control?
not very much. I do have a little bit of money in the system, and I have a little bit of gold and silver. But I think in the average historical periods, I've studied history. Sometimes you just have to go through the bankruptcy, and you'll
Absolutely.
end up better on the other side. It's like
Absolutely.
you break your arm. Do you let it fester, or do you set the limb? You set the limb. It's going to hurt like a mofo, but you have to set the limb. And unfortunately,
I agree.
with Keynesianism, we aren't setting the limb. What about you?
But the funny thing, I'll just say one last thing. It was none other than John Maynard Keynes himself that warned against unlimited Keynesianism. He, at the end of his life, understood that Keynesianism is a stimulus, but no more than a stimulus. So I don't think that people even read Keynes correctly. He, more than anybody, understood that Keynes was meant to be stimulus. It was not meant to be a never-ending system. Go ahead, Wasserman.
Well, I mean, my thoughts are, to express my thoughts, we'd have to backtrack quite a bit and pull up on the stick. I'm still thinking about the start of the conversation and the observation on Trump's current power. I don't think that I think the challenge that Trump faced on entering office both times is there's no way to exaggerate or overstate the amount of resistance and institutional not only inertia but active undermining that's been directed at his presidency. I think what it's shown us is that every presidency faces it, and certainly that's what Putin was alluding to in his interview with Carlson when he had talked about his initial discussion about joining NATO. But there's obviously a vast array of shadow government arrayed against any president, and so how do you tackle that? Do you tackle that? By the way, this vast shadow government that's arrayed against the president controls, and now legally, since since the changes that occurred during the Obama presidency that reversed the prohibition of psyops on American territory. This shadow government controls the mechanism of propaganda. So, what do you do if you really want to make a change? You can't go in for a full frontal assault. You just can't. The machinery of propaganda is too heavy. So I don't know if either of you two have ever known a really, 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 really rich person. I don't claim that this is true.
I have known a few. I have known a very few really rich people
Okay, so
connected to the classical music world, but we never ever talk politics. Ever.
Have any of those really, really rich people shambled around in worn clothes and drove broken down old cars or bicycles and have been to all outward?
Oh yes. Oh yes. Oh yes.
Okay, the one I met, and this guy,
and especially in Mexico.
Yeah, especially in Mexico. That's right, for a very good reason. All right, so we agree that extremely powerful people often portray themselves as not being quite as powerful in order to protect themselves, in order to gain advantage. And this has been my experience as well. And so, my ruminations on the whole situation is that again, I can only talk about my own experience and what I wouldn't even say what I would do, because I know I'm not skillful at this. I've just been in enough corridors of NGO power to have observed. It seems to me that
I've never been as polished as you to get into an NGO, but I can assure you that those who make it into an NGO end up with such an amazing sinecure, including the ones that service them, that they will always go with what is expected of them. What they do, which I've noticed, especially when I saw it in Israel, is that basically they take people that are not very smart, and they look for people that are going to have a family, 1 or 2 kids. This is very important. Put them in private schools, pay their housing, pay everything, give them business class and credit card for unlimited restaurants. And the threat is, if you step out of line, you will not only not work at this NGO, but the whole system of the gatekeepers, which you see in New York now with corporations, you will never get in again. Now, having kids is an important thing.
Yeah, I agree.
Because, basically, you don't want to be where it's hard to get a job in the private sector and you need 2 kids to take care of. So it's a very, very self-regulating and self-policing type of environment.
Yeah,
and I don't know if people even realize that.
Oh no. So where I was going with this is that it seems to me that if I were Trump, even though I know I couldn't do it and I'm not good at it, I imagine that I would have to let the deep state think that they are winning to some degree.
Mm-hmm.
You can't corner a rat, and so it's important it's important to allow your enemy to believe they're winning until the moment that they're not. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know for sure. I don't have like a QAnon type belief that that it's all preordained and Trump will one day snap his fingers.
Nothing is preordained. Mm-hmm. But the point is, there is absolutely nothing preordained.
Yeah.
But that article today, that op-ed in Times of Israel, laid things out so starkly. It's very rare that somebody from the system will come and just spill out exactly how things work. And it probably went over everybody's head that there is this permanent administrative state, a permanent, what you would call some people call it the deep state, the permanent administrative state, the way things have always been.
Yeah.
Tom likes to talk about City of London. And
they used to have a fabulous sitcom on BBC about it.
Oh yeah. Yes, Minister.
okay, so in fact, let me read from this article. Hold on, because this doesn't just apply to Israel. It applies, I think, universally. So let me go find this, okay? The guys keep talking while I find the article. Because I think for people to really understand, that French expression that goes back, I guess, to the 19th century about plus à changer, plus c'est de même chose. This has gone on for ages. I mean, the Bourbons may have never been restored, but a lot of the trappings never changed either.
Did you have a chance to look at that article that I wrote that you're prompting?
Not
Which
yet.
one? Maybe we can go into that also. Okay.
Yeah.
Hold on. Let me go for 1 second to find.
Yep. It was the genius of the U.S. Constitution, pitting power against power to prevent tyranny.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, I put it on anyway. I guess I'll probably put it up on my Substack. Anyway, where I was going is that reports. I think it's premature to make a pronouncement about what Trump has or has not achieved.
Yeah.
So, it's certainly the lack of outward progress doesn't mean much. It might mean lack of progress, or it might mean that he's being very smart about the progress he's, about.
Well, I know have friends, closer to the administration than us, and they're saying that Trump is really isolated this time as president. He's surrounding himself basically with a lot of yes men who are, unlike the previous generation where there was only a handful of people who were loyal to him and would tell him the truth. He's got a bunch of people around him that are loyal to him, but are telling him what he wants to hear.
Well, I mean, that's always the case. So my observation is that any reasonably experienced executive, not only, any reasonably experienced executive understands that this is always the case. I have never, in any of my executive positions, it has always been a primary axiom that nobody's going to tell me the truth.
Yeah.
And so, when I hear that, all I hear is blah 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 blah. I mean, I hear the yammerings of people that don't have a clue.
Well, for me, what I understand is that really, fortunately, he had a great campaign manager, put her as chief of staff, and she has a record of just gaslighting her boss. And that's why
I cannot count the number of times in my career that I let things explode on purpose.
That's true. That's fine. Oh, Dave's dropped out.
He'll be back. Yeah.
Yeah, he'll be back.
All of this means nothing to me. I mean, these, you have to remember, what are we comparing it against? We're comparing it against a media that universally sang the praises of a hyper competent administration for the last 4 years. That this supposedly hyper competent administration that have come perilously close to destroying the United States. So these chorus of voices that are denouncing Trump, and trying to compare him to
people that are loyal to MAGA, but they are upset that Trump has surrounded himself with people who aren't.
Well, all noise to me. I mean, as far as I said this last time as well. There are, as far as I'm concerned, there is a vast array of agents of the administrative state at work worming their way into the confidences of every MAGA person they can in order to disrupt and divert the movement. I said it last time. I think that's what happened to James Lindsay. I think that's what's happening to Candace Owens. I think that there is a concerted effort to undermine the credibility and the effectiveness of anybody who is against the administrative state, and that they, most people are just not mentally prepared to deal with the fact that anyone they think they might trust is probably lying to them. And in this particular respect, Trump has an advantage because, as I said earlier, anyone in his position understands that everyone is always lying to him.
Mm-hmm. Well, for me, looking at this situation roughly is like someone said it a while ago. I can't remember who it was, but there was someone was being interviewed, and they said, "Yeah, the Democrats will probably take back the House in the midterm, maybe the Senate, but they will do the maximum crazy thing. They won't go after any obvious corruption within the Trump administration." And there is some corruption going on, paper play stuff with especially with the Attorney General and Susie Wiles. But they'll go for really hardcore, crazy stuff because that's what their base will want. And that will turn the public radically against them when they start going at, like, trying to save, like, the Somalis and who have pirates in Wisconsin and stuff like that. And
all of this stuff is absolute stupidity. I mean, there's some grain of truth to all of it. There is veracity, but to make it the main topic of political discussion it's really shows that it makes me question this idea of democracy. And I've come to the conclusion that democracy, or modern democracy, was basically written for one reason. It was basically done so that you vote the consents for the elites to do whatever they want. So basically, because you have this exercise of voting and going through the Edward Bernays circus, it's nothing but different than a Roman circus. But because you voted, you gave your consent for us to do whatever we want. That's what I'm thinking at my younger age. It's, I mean, it's one ludicrous circus after the next.
Right. Yeah, I think we're on. There's going to be a bunch of authoritarian dictatorships headed in our way, and we might actually.
I think we're already authoritarian. Trump is not particularly authoritarian, but the world has become very, very authoritarian. Europe has already become basically the Fourth Reich, without saying, but trying to keep it very bland.
I look at more as the Union of Social Republics. That's what. So
well, yeah, probably yes, because they're just as boring as most of the leaders that existed in the USSR. So I found this article, and let me read a little bit of it. The trouble is when I go off the screen, I seem to get
paused, like you've just got paused now. He really needs to get a laptop. Anyways, when I look at the EU, I think of the USSR, especially the leaders and that.
Well, this is what I say this every time we talk. This has been the normal state of affairs for the vast majority of human history. And the people who happen to have been born in the one exceptional era are deluded to think that there's any reason why it should continue to be that way.
Yep, I agree.
No, but there is a reason why democracy has become, this guy out of China, what was his name? Larry McDonald, or whatever, said the world's most dangerous religion, because basically you're forcing people to consent so that nobody can push back. You're basically consenting to all the nonsense. So let me read you the first line of this, and it just shows you really. And I can go to the laptop next time. Trump promised Turkey.
And he's frozen again. Yeah.
I'll just say that
Trump Trump, now listen to what I said. Trump promised Turkey certain things. Israel will make sure that Washington blocks it. Now, most people don't have the chutzpah to write something like that.
Mm.
But that, it's an article that everybody should read because it goes into the details of how the halls of Washington really, really work.
Mm.
And it makes me very, very concerned that you can have these different stakeholders basically wagging the tail of the dog so that there is no cogent U.S. foreign policy. Very, very troubling. And I'm glad in a way that somebody actually wrote it out loud. And I would love to read some of it, but the moment I go there, you say I get frozen. Do I get frozen, or can you still hear me?
No, you get totally frozen.
Well, all right. If I had a laptop, maybe that wouldn't happen.
Yeah.
It is just absolutely alarming.
Yep.
So let me talk about a few things that are going on. Now, let me start with the Middle East. So basically, Trump policy, which I support, is that they're trying to make a stable area going from the Mediterranean, which includes Israel and Lebanon, across to the Gulf, and that includes Syria. Now, it seems to me like I'm one of the only 5 or 10 Jews in the world that are very impressed with Ahmed al-Sharar. Everybody else thinks he's a terrorist, he's a jihadist, he's a this, he's got horns, he's got a dragon's tail in his back and all that. Well, okay, the fact is they've asked to do stuff with Israel. They haven't done anything bad to Israel. They've recognized Israel. They don't allow the name Zionist entity or anything to be used. But because of the administration in Israel and that cabinet, and with nobody could say is a success what happened in Gaza. I don't, very far. Yes, you have people that are making pretzels and saying what a great success it was. The fact is, it happened on their watch. So what do? They take it out on al-Sharar, and they come up with this ludicrous plan that we saw going all the way back to what Westphalian tried to avoid, which was to basically break up states and make these little Bantustans, whether the most famous one in our time is Yugoslavia, the fall of the Soviet Union, certainly giving all these republics their so-called independence. And yet the European Union itself doesn't want any of the Bantustans they create, such as Kosovo, which is totally false and phony. Also, North Macedonia, which I renamed, I called it North Massacrap Natoville, because it was the only state in history that was created for NATO rather than the other way around. There was no basis to that at all. It was simply a state created to put NATO guns trained on Serbia, principally because it's a Slavic country, and trained possibly towards the east, but mainly trained. So you have Serbia surrounded by Kosovo. You have Serbia surrounded by North Massacrap or North Macedonia. And Croatia, if you really look at it, relations are always just on the verge of simmering between the two states. But what you succeeded in doing was breaking up Yugoslavia, which was one of the most successful states in Europe because it was not part of the Soviet Union. And yes, it was socialist, but because they were independent, they had a major manufacturing base. Probably, Wasserman, you know more about that than I do. So this idea of minorities and everybody having a right to their little statelets, and Sykes-Picot was a disaster. No, Sykes-Picot definitely was a product of British and French interloping and trying to keep everybody at each other's throats. But at least they made states big enough that you could enforce some kind of a Westphalian system. And generally, when did the minorities revolt in the Sykes-Picot days? Was when the outside interlopers and outside powers wanted them to revolt. and funded them to revolt. Do you have a different opinion on that, Wasserman?
No. This has been.
I mean, the problem of the Kurds has been a problem that goes back to the Ottoman Empire. They're just in a position where they've not been able to get a state. Now, the question is, how many substantial amounts of population around the world have never been able to get their own state? I'm sure there's many of them. And I mean, this whole idea that you grant statelets to people are not ever for their benefit. It's always for the dominant power to maintain hegemony.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, as a to relate that to my favorite subject, that's why Ukraine was created at the United Nations.
Absolutely. I don't think neither the League of Nations nor the United Nations served any other purpose than to basically create a way that the empires that lost their empires, that no longer had the financial ability to sustain them, could keep control through other means.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm convinced to this day that's what the League of Nations and United Nations were, and still are. Would you agree with that statement?
Oh, I'm not 100% sure. You and I diverge on this one. I think it's possible. I don't claim absolute certainty about this, but I think it's possible that World War I proved to be a disaster even for the rich and powerful. That far exceeded their imaginations of how big a disaster it could be. So, because in other words, I certainly think that small contained wars, serve a certain hidden class of people who get rich off of them. But I think World War I may well have been devastating, even, to everyone, even the class that normally profits off of war.
Oh, it was, and it was completely unnecessary. I mean, it was. Germany said several times by 2016, we have basically won the war or served our purpose. And Germany in 1916 was willing to give back every bit of territory that they had conquered from the West and go back to the status quo.
The best accounting of it that I've ever read is Berlinski's account on Human Affairs. And
Berlinski? Who is Berlinski?
Oh, if you don't know David Berlinski, you're in for a treat. So just look up David Berlinski and look for On Human Affairs. He's probably the most bitingly sarcastic writer I've ever read. He's tied at least with Borens. Borens, not Borens. I always say his name wrong. This Way to the Gas, ladies and gentlemen, is his work. So anyway, so considering that World War I was such a disaster, I have thought to myself that the League of Nations was, after World War I, certainly, very possibly, an honest attempt to ensure that kind of war would never take place again.
Now, how could you say that when the League of Nations was the enforcer of the Diktat of Versailles on one side, and in a way, because of its setup, refusing to deal with Russia, maintained the Soviet Union? I mean, I would have to agree that the Diktat of Versailles was probably one of the worst, maybe the worst, of many bad things that happened to Europe within 200-300 years.
Well,
and look what it produced.
I think people are stupid and fallible, and that all institutions tend towards corruption. So and I'm no fan of the League of Nations. I'm just saying that I think there may have been some sort of honest element about wishing to prevent another World War I in there, and I limit myself.
Well, yeah, okay, but if you had that desire, then you would have had the League of Nations. repudiate the Diktat of Versailles, and they didn't. However, I would agree with you that they were more interested in preventing another war than the United Nations, which for me was simply the British, the Americans, and the French became a joke, but the French did lead to the European Union, that all these powers basically reinforced their powers by, once again, democracy, consent of the masses and the third world powers. That, I believe, how the United Nations was designed. Again, that everything is done by consent, but that nothing changes.
Well, I think, and I was going to say this earlier, everything is always done by consent anyway, because unless there's a peasant revolt, there's implicit consent.
Yeah.
So the only thing that's not done by consent is, when you have a peasant revolt.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when was the last great peasant revolt?
Gosh.
I would say the fall of the rise of the Soviet Union or the fall of the Soviet Union were the two last really great ones.
You think the fall of the Soviet Union was really a mass peasant revolt, or it was a revolt?
Yeah, that one seemed to be much more organic. I mean, it was a lot of factors that went into it. That was definitely not like the West propagating the color revolution. We were all just as surprised that it happened. No one thought the Soviet Union was going to fall, certainly in the CIA. They thought it was just going to continue on. And yeah, I would say that was the attempt. The last failed might have been Tiananmen, was spontaneously organized and then crushed with a little bit of the help from the West, because we wanted a stable China, not a one gripped by revolutionary fear. And we thought stupidly that if we gave them more economic growth, they would adopt democracy. And I'm like, that's not how this works. Like,
but democracy is so good.
I know. Well, but
I don't know. Call me the outlier, but I've been questioning democracy or democracy for years. I just think the whole thing is smoke and mirrors.
Well, you would have been right at home with Thomas Jefferson. Yeah, I'm no big fan of democracy either.
Yeah, I'm no big fan of
democracy. I mean, if you look at the eponym of the Greek eponym of democracy, demo means crowd, and crowd for me equals mob. So if you want to run by legalized mob rule, so the elites have your consent, I mean, I would actually say that the origins, not the French Revolution itself, was one of the most violent events that ever took place, but the intellectual origins of the French Revolution probably came closer to this idea of so-called democracy, because you had the rulers, the Bourbons, and the landed gentries on one side and the bourgeoisie on the other side. That probably is a little bit closer to what would represent the beginnings of a democracy, which turned into a complete mob rule and mob mass slaughter, than anything else. Even the American Revolution didn't have that.
No, it did have some pogroms against the Empire Loyalists that Americans tend to forget. But we Canadians get taught about it in 7th grade, so it's okay.
I missed that.
Well, in hidden history, I always say half of history is buried, and a good percentage of that buried history is also forbidden history that you're not allowed to talk about. And if you do dare talk about it, then you're a crackpot or a revisionist or an ethnic hater or God knows what else.
Yeah. But when the problem is people start using those terms, young people don't care. They're like, oh, you call me Hitler? Fine. I guess I'm going to have to think Hitler's cool now. That's kind of what young people do. They just do not care. Like, just watch the Nick Fuentes, Piers Morgan debate.
Well,
Piers Morgan's going out and using all the magic words, as I call them. And he's like, so what? Now what?
Nick Fuentes is not yet a decision maker. He's a comedian for the moment. He may become a decision maker someday. I wouldn't rule it out, but he's certainly nothing but a comedian. But he is voicing very similarly. Now here's something very scary. Nick Fuentes has something in common with the great Christian guy that just got killed. What was his name? Charlie
Charlie
Kirk.
Kirk.
They both represent a very disgruntled young people that have no ability to buy a house.
Yep.
The one does it from a Christian standpoint, and the other does it from the the classic. What's the name of the fat guy in Detroit that said
I
"F
always
you"
compare
when
him
Trump
more to
got
Al
elected?
Sharpton. I think he is an Al Sharpton figure for white people,
Well,
minus the religious stuff.
Maybe.
have either of you
He's
guys?
not nearly. The strange thing about Nick Fuentes
Mm.
is certain people that are pretty astute in the Jewish world. He is not nearly as anti-Semitic as many of the others go. He's
Oh yeah,
much more malleable. No
he,
comparison, even with, it's what's the name of the guy, the really fat slob in Detroit that was a genius, that predicted the Trump win, and he's put out a lot of good
okay, yeah,
movies.
Roger Moore.
Yeah, Roger. What's his
Yeah.
name?
Moore, like the actor, but not.
Yeah, Moore. Yeah, and he predicted the Trump thing. He said everybody's just going to go to the vote and they're going to say "F you."
Yep.
And but the weird thing, and if you go into the Jewish world, that there is an awful lot of similarities between Charlie Kirk and Nick Fuentes
Yep.
and who their audience is. Their audience,
Mhm.
people think that they're just completely opposed to each other in terms of audience share, but in terms of audience share, I suspect that many are the same people.
Oh yeah, totally.
I think that is something that,
as I've said before, with this Christian Zionist and the Likud element and all that, this whole thing was that this religious revival that's happening in the United States, where young men and women are going out and reading the Bible and suddenly discovering that all their preachers have been telling them bullshit about Israel for decades, and basically say, they're like, this is not what's written here. We're supposed to convert all the Jews to Christianity, just as we're supposed to do.
well, that's the whole point. And you see the genius of Hamas.
From a Christian
Well, that's it. The genius of Hamas and the left is that basically, how did they get the young people to violently turn against Israel? Very smart with their academics in the States. They said, look, guys, all this money is going to Israel. Well, not nearly as much money goes to Israel as goes to other countries. But basically, you can't buy a house because of all these people crawling on their bellies to Netanyahu. And they really, that's why Mamdani was put into power. The Democratic Party cannot afford to lose New York City. And Mamdani is their latest guy to calm down the anger in young people. And the Jews don't really count in terms of numbers.
Yeah,
so
never have.
I don't buy the "you can't buy a house" thing. In my opinion, the "you can't buy a house" thing is it's the party line that was put out there to give the boomers an easy thing to latch onto. I don't know if either of you have ever interacted with or seen von Clausewitz on X. All right,
yeah, he's the one that's writing on Ukraine. He writes on Ukraine all the time.
That's right. You should go hang out in a space with von Clausewitz sometime.
Oh yeah, no, I've dealt with.
It'll be
which one? Von Clausewitz, the Syrian guy?
No, the Canadian. He's a young Canadian guy. Von Clausewitz.
With the clown. The guy of von Clausewitz, right?
Clausewitz.
He's originally from Syria, from Aleppo. We talk sometimes.
Okay, could be then. I don't know that. All I know is that he's.
He and I have pretty much similar views about Syria. We're both pro-Syria.
Well, go hang out.
Which I guess we're being.
Go
yeah, I haven't been. He used to come on my spaces.
But you
times if you're talking about von Clausewitz, yeah.
You go hang out on the space that he's on sometime. It'll be eye-opening.
Yeah, well, I don't go on spaces that much anymore because
there's
what's happened on spaces
out there anymore.
Spaces right now have basically become just a bunch of angry mobs shouting the same thing at each other's, and nobody's interested in the difference of opinion, and it's become very tribal. I think that spaces have basically used up their usefulness. It's
Mm,
unfortunate. There are a few good ones that come once in a while,
mm,
but most of them are absolutely incorrigible. You cannot have a differing of opinion,
mm.
especially in the
Yeah,
ones that I'm the most involved with. I mean,
it's nonetheless very educational to sit in on the spaces of these young Canadian guys, most of whom have seen military service.
Mm.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
And by the
well,
way, they're not
um,
talking about the cost of houses.
yes, but you see, they're in Canada. If you're in Florida and you've just finished college and have a big, huge mortgage of college bills to pay and loans, and you're facing with, if you've gotten married, and the cheapest house you can find is $500,000 or $600,000. When my parents were around, that same house was $20,000. It's a
David,
very serious issue.
it's worse in Canada than it is in the U.S. And if you're an American Chad, if you're a young American guy, you don't want to be in any you actually don't want to be in these places like Florida where the houses are that much. If you're a young American Chad, you're moving out to the country. You're going to buy yourself a house for 50 or 100,000 bucks. You're going to get a job as a welder. You're going to build your own company. I know guys like that. I meet them every fucking day, actually, in Missouri, and so there's a lot of them out there. They're great guys too. No, the can't buy a house crowd is the crowd that's deliberately staying in these coastal blue strongholds or Canada, and they're deliberately staying there because they're a certain personality type,
Yeah.
and they're
Well, I must have that. I must have that personality type because I've always been a big city person as a classical musician.
I
I
think that a
suppose you
good
can
example of
understand
this
why.
is when I was in England for the first time, and my friend said, "Hey, we're passing along this route, and Stonehenge is down the road." So we go to like the town near Stonehenge. Can't remember what it's called. And there's a bar, and you drop £5, and they'll watch your bags while you go take the bus to Stonehenge. So we all did that. And the guy in the bar who owns the bar said to us, "You know what? I've never been to Stonehenge." And we're like, really? Like, you weren't forced to go to Stonehenge when you're 12 on a school trip? Like, seriously? But that's the attitude, is that we in the West, of Americans, Canadians, South Americans, we're all descended from the people who left Europe. And the people in Europe are all descended from the people who stayed in Europe. And there's mindsets and attitudes that go along with that, those decisions that come along.
Yeah, I mean, listen, David, you and I were both coastal guys when I was young. I was a coastal kind of guy too, but it means
I
something
still
different.
am. I'm just coastal in South America, but things are unaffordable for most people
I got
in
the
these
hell out of the
cities.
coast, and I'll tell you, I drove back. I drove back across from Kansas City to Newport News a while back, and the minute I crossed over the Blue Ridge Mountains, I was surrounded by assholes, and I said to myself, never again. And although I have to be honest, I am thinking about moving to Florida, but that's more for health reasons than anything else. If it
Return
wasn't
to the
for
land of your ancestors.
Florida,
Yeah.
no, I'm a New Yorker.
No, I'm making the joke. That's a friend of mine is Jewish, and he always talks about his parents always returning to the land of
You
ancestors.
say this, but the truth of the matter is, anybody with a lot of money, which I don't have at the moment, but anybody that's very, very wealthy that likes what I like, is always going to have some kind of a small place in New York. I mean, or a small place in one of the big, huge cities. If that's
Mhm.
if you have enough that's interesting to you in the urban world, you have to be a certain. I've always said about New York, you have no business being there unless you have a reason to be there.
I was born there. I grew up there for a long time. I thought I would always come back if or I dreamed of going back, especially for the intellectual stimulation. At this point, and I am hoping to make a lot of money in the near future, and we are starting to shop around in Florida. I will tell you something. New York City is not even in our remotest. It never crosses our mind. I would not step foot in New York City if you paid me.
maybe it's not the same New York anymore.
That's right. It isn't.
Yep.
But I mean, I remember the elegance of the both the Upper West and the Upper East Sides, and a certain class of people, and also in my own home city in San Francisco, and I have very fond memories of that. And I still think that
San Francisco used to be my either first or second favorite. San Francisco used to be
it used
tied.
to be.
Yeah. There was a time when there would have been nothing that would have made me happier than living in San Francisco. Nothing. That time is long gone.
And it's a pity because these are the places where we grew up, and they were marvelous places. Coming back now to a little bit of what's going on over in the other part of the world. So, the most dangerous situation going on in the Middle East for me right now, aside from Israel really blowing it with Syria, and you have guys in the cabinet advocating that al-Sharar should be assassinated and all. I mean, it's just bizarre. It's a very broken government, in my opinion. Of course, 99% think it's the most marvelous government of all times. But we've seen this in history before. Uh, the rift between the UAE and Saudi Arabia could be more serious than what we think. It goes way beyond anything with Israel and the Arabs. So what's happened is Israel and the UAE have basically become one unit, or as Simon Dixon would say, the financial industrial complex. And they by far are the most successful, and that they don't have the burdens that Saudi Arabia and Turkey does. But they also don't have the massive populations. So if Saudi Arabia and UAE get into a tiff, it's not going to be pleasant. And I don't think enough people are paying attention to that. There are definitely power plays going on with the UAE and Israel wanting to control, rightfully so, large swathes of the Red Sea and East Africa. But Saudi and Turkey also want to control the same area.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem is that when you see articles like the one I spoke about in the beginning of the space that I can't read because I'll freeze, apparently,
Mm-hmm.
You're setting up a situation which is not good for the United States, where the United States cannot leave the region, where the United States cannot cobble what they want to do is to take all these countries that are now potential rivals and put them into one block. And it looks like it might have worked, but it seems that the states inside the Middle East themselves are not cooperating because of domestic political problems.
Well,
And also because
let me challenge you to think about something. So, earlier we were talking about these artificial states that were created in order to control geopolitics.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So, David, I know you love Israel, but why is Israel not one of those artificially created states?
Israel, well, okay, there are two ways to look at it. For the British, Israel and Transjordan, or what some call Palestine, were absolutely created as artificial states.
Mm-hmm.
Now, from an Israeli standpoint, I will not buy in, and this is why people end up calling me an anti-Semite, that we came back to our 3,000-year-old land. Well, yeah, we did. But so you have a lot of other people that have 3,000-year-old lands too. You have the Assyrians, you have the Nabateans, you have the Circassians, you have lots.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we were just a little bit smarter about it and put financial muscle behind it.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, right. But that still does not entitle you automatically to a state. So just because Rockefeller gave a lot of money and re-raised. So why am I so pro-Israel and so pro-Syria? Israel found a way to sustain itself for the past 80 years. A lot of guile, a lot of cunning, a lot of horse trading, a tremendously wealthy diaspora, like the way the U.S. was founded by landowners and stuff, and we did it by other ways. Israel, to me, today is entitled to be a state because they survived almost a century of impossibilities and are still there and established themselves as a financial power. Now, they never established themselves in the beginning by themselves. That was a British invention. No question that was one of many artificial inventions during Sykes-Picot. The question is, I've given you something Are you going to maintain it? Or are you going to let it blow up when the colonies were established in the States? In what's today's United States, there was no guarantee that they would become an independent country. It wasn't even on the list. Some states make it, some states don't.
Fair enough.
And that's how I would. I'm not going to take we came back to our biblical land and you got to read the Torah. Yeah, I read the Torah. Israel found a way to sustain itself.
Fair enough.
And
The
a lot of enemies.
The only thing I'll say, and none of it is disagreement.
Did I give an answer? Did I give an answer that surprised you?
No. Actually, I mean, it's really consistent with who you are, and that's probably one of the many reasons why we get along. And I'm
a fierce nationalist. I mean, I call myself a libertarian nationalist, but now that I understand a lot of the frauds of libertarians, I'm putting the nationalism in front of the libertarianism. And as a matter of fact, even though Israel has had a terrible year this year and didn't even grow by 1%, Israel is the only consistent Western state that in normal years is birth rate positive. That counts for something.
The only thing that I will say in addition to, and it's not against what you said, it's just in addition to what you said, is that I've always been deeply depressed at exactly how Israel succeeded. And
it didn't. Okay, if you ever watched the movie Birth of a Nation, it's not a nice movie. No state establishes themselves at the conference table. No state establishes themselves by Rachmanus. I wish that was the case, but no state has ever established itself nicely, and no state will ever establish itself nicely. Because we live in a predatory world.
So then, as long as we all acknowledge that and speak honestly about that, which I know you do, David, which is why you're not welcome on the Israeli forums.
I'm not welcome.
As long as we all admit that, then yes.
Yeah. No.
Yeah. Look, when we as Americans go to Europe and we look at the glory of the British Empire and the glory of Rome, and the joie de vivre of the French, you understand, that's maybe 20-25%. We don't look at the other 75% of what all these empires did. We admire the empire for the rule of law. What?
I totally do.
And that's why on every one of these discussions, I say that it's the conceit and delusion of our generation to believe that the particular conditions under which we were born and lived is some kind of permanent state of humanity. It's quite the opposite. There
is nothing permanent.
Yeah.
That's what Lord Palmerston always insisted. No permanent friends, no permanent enemies, only eternal interests.
Yeah.
And I think it's very cynical. Look, I think it's very cynical what Israel is doing to Syria. I hate every bit of it. But it's possible, even though I think you have a very poor leadership on Balfour Street, that these people really believe that for Israel to survive, a lot of them actually believe that Syria, just as Jerusalem is the spiritual center of the Jews, well, Damascus or the Umayyad dynasty is the spiritual center of the Ummah. The people really believe that, and that there's a complete incompatibility. And that this guy is a jihad and he's a this and that. It's no rationality. And what's going to end up happening is Israel may end up actually prevailing, but they're going to create a lot of misery for themselves and everybody else doing it. And so the argument is, well, we will prevail no matter what. And that's how empires have always prevailed. What?
That's the pattern of Israel's success, in my humble opinion. I mean, look at Lebanon.
Now, in my opinion, where I think you have a possible success with Israel, I mean, I am 100%, I have always been, since you've known me, very, very connected to the idea not only of Israel-Syria relations, but can that Middle East, which I love, achieve some type of integration? And I don't think that that's a bad thing. I think that's a good thing. Can we move to a Westphalian system in the Middle East? And everyone, oh, no, you can't. I said, well, who says we can't? You say you can. I don't say we can't. If you have the right winning combination, the right people at the right time, you could move to a quasi-Western. Oh no, the rise of Islamism and of jihadism and all. Look, Islamism is 700 years younger than Christianity. How was Christianity 700 years ago? It's just as violent.
Hmm.
And actually, the Muslims, to tell you the truth, based on my travels, are actually progressing faster than the Christians did. So, yeah, I mean, how much did the West create all these monsters? That's why I always talk about the Middle East, who created all these jihadists, who created all these people. And I think that Syria, maybe he really is a jihadi, but every indication I've seen is they've seen 15 years of misery. One of the reasons, so why do I think Syria has a possibility of making it? And I may be 1,000% wrong, because I look at the Jewish people and I say, we have an amazing diaspora and we only survived because of the diaspora. Well, Syria has a bunch of amazing diaspora also. So today, if I want to create a state, and we can go throughout Europe, I want to look at the diasporas and see which diasporas are willing to put their money where their mouth is. Well, for many, many years, the Irish never did it. The Irish didn't start putting their money where their mouth was in Ireland until just before the Good Friday Agreement. And that's when all the American Irish billionaires started to build Ireland up. Unfortunately, in the 50s and the 60s, when you had all those workhouses and all that, the Irish in the United States did not put their money into Ireland. Now, Israel had an advantage because we had just come through, of course, the Holocaust, but also Israel established itself, and it would never survive today, as an asset protection country with Israel bonds. So basically, everybody with money in the Jewish world would gain 7% and tax free. But if you had not had asset protection the first 20 years, the state might not have survived. But again, these are the type of things we don't talk about. But they're completely valid, and they should be celebrated. And the United States eventually destroyed Israel the same way they destroyed Switzerland for asset protection. And they did terrible things.
Mhm.
And they did terrible things to Switzerland, but not to Ireland.
Yeah, it's the Hobbesian world we live in. So.
Yep. Yeah, no, it's always been interesting to me that Israel is found partly by various groups of terrorist gangs, has been such a victim of terrorism for most of its existence.
Well, that's the British. That's the British. And you see, my
Oh,
view
I
is
don't think the British arranged for you to the Stern gang to blow up 100 of their people.
well, no, but you're right. You're absolutely right. But I mean, that's how the region existed. But again, first they mandated Palestine for the Jews, and then 2 years later, 3 years later, they created Haj Amin al-Husseini, who was one of the most violent anti-Jewish people, anti-Semites, anti-Jews that ever lived. The structure was built that way. So I think what you'll find interesting about me, the reason I don't fit well, is that I'm against all the anti-Israeli people like Norman Finkelstein and Elon Papi and all these. And I am a right winger, and I'm a fierce supporter of Zionism in Israel. But I'm against those people too in the way they're handling things. So it's just like being a half pregnant woman. You know what I mean?
Finkelstein is a rabid dog. He's obviously suffering from some kind of brain malfunction.
And he admits it. I spoke to a guy that met him at Stanford, and he said he knows half the stuff of what he says is BS. But, all these guys, Pappy, Finkelstein, oh, you're a self-hating Jew. No, I just think that Israel should be moving on to the next level.
Hang on.
The problem is,
he admitted to somebody that half of what he said is BS. I want to hear more.
Yeah, my friend in Uganda, he admitted that half of what he says is BS, but that's what makes him his living.
Okay. All right, fair enough.
Plus, you have another problem, okay? Joseph Raimundo and all these people, is that Jews from the left tend to be very much into antiwar.com. I'm also very anti-war. I was against the war in Iraq and all that. I think it was absolutely criminal. I have never been a very pro-war person. I'm a diplomatic kind of guy. I like great leaders. I like authoritarians. I like dictators. War, I don't like. But you see, you have a lot of Jews who were anti-war, and then they discovered that Israel doesn't fit that pattern. Um, Israel was meant, as Gonzalo Leary used to say, to be a disruptor in the area, for the U.S. to shout to some general that was being run by the states, take your dog out of the kennel and go bomb someplace in Iraq or Iran, and then go back to your kennel. Now, why I liked Bibi for many years, believe it or not this last 5 years, I've turned very
I know
much
where you're going.
into
Yeah.
opposition.
Mm.
But the reason I liked him was that he stopped some of that. He developed phenomenal relationships with Russia, phenomenal relationships with China, and really started to build a global network.
Mhm.
Why do I think Israel has a right to exist, has to be a state? Is that they didn't ask the right.
I don't
They
believe any
developed.
country has a right to exist. That's
No,
my
but no, look, that's exactly it. No country has a right to exist. No state has a right to exist. It exists.
yeah, exactly.
Am I making sense? In fact, I don't want to even say who said that. I will paraphrase somebody whose name we will not mention.
Mm.
A leader is not called upon to lead. He leads.
Yeah.
So when I hear we have a right to defend, no, we have no right to defend ourselves. We prosecute what we need to prosecute. But you will never hear me say we have a right to defend ourselves. I don't believe in the IDF. I believe in the IWF, Israeli War Department, and I feel the same way about the Arabs. I mean, let's cut out this defense thing, and we have a right to defend. These are all these post World War I democratic trappings.
Mm.
No, we don't.
Well, again, that's why I say it's the Hobbesian. All right, well, I can never argue with it because it's. I agree.
Yeah, we all
I
kind
don't
of
know.
agree on these things.
Are you surprised to hear me say that? I mean, that's
No, I mean,
maybe why
listen,
I'm not.
we've known each other for about a year, and I know you well enough. It's entirely consistent with who you are. I mean, it really is. I mean, I haven't heard you say those exact words in a while, but I'm not surprised because you're a very intellectually honest person.
Mhm.
I mean, the fact of the matter is, Bibi Netanyahu has to be out of office because October 7th happened on his watch. It
Yep.
doesn't matter whether it's his fault. He had nothing to do with it. He set up the situation. He let Hamas have tons of money, or he defended the state, or actually that's his way of preventing a two-state caca, which I'm completely against because I don't see it as viable. It just cannot be because of outside interests. And as a nationalist, look, I like Arabs. I love Arabs. I go to Arab countries. I'm one of the only pro-Israelis you'll ever meet that I'm always singing the praises of Syria and Egypt and stuff. But I have nothing against Palestinians. But Palestinianism is something I will fight against because Palestinianism is just a vehicle to end the state. So I can be still pro-Palestine people and be against Palestinianism. Very few
Yep.
people even understand that that kind of a difference. But this
Not distinction.
cartoonish thing about jihadists and Arabs and Muslims and all Muslims this and they're the greatest threat to the West. No, they're not. Israel's greatest threat is still the EU and still aspects of the city of London, even today.
Mhm.
And for Israel to survive, and this is what I do like about Trump, it needs to end this special relationship. There is no such a thing as a special relationship. Special relationships are only between the United States and England. That's it because of the history. And even that is as abusive as anything possible.
Yeah, I would say that special relationships, and this is again based on my just general commercial and life experience, special relationships is when one person is exploiting another person and the exploited person doesn't realize it. We had a question
Well,
from the chat.
I think they may know. They may actually realize it, but they're benefiting so much that they go along with it.
We had someone in the chat saying that Israel Palestine essentially had a two-state solution before October 7th. Did they not?
No, they did not because the other side didn't accept it. I mean, the fact is that Hamas, which I hate to say, people in the Likud, started by Shamir, supported all these years. Sheldon Adelson, one of my heroes, was willing to fund billions and billions and billions of dollars into Gaza. I used to go to Gaza when I was young. But some of the best fish in the world was there. In fact, you had Israeli cooks used to go to Gaza to learn how to cook fish from the natives. And Sheldon Adelson was willing to put in untold billions, and this is a guy who had untold billions, to build out Gaza that would be a free zone better than Tel Aviv. And the Palestinian Authority was actually willing to go along with it. The only reason why the Palestinian Authority resisted, you're going to laugh at this one, is that Saeb Erekat, who was the Palestinian foreign minister, was absolutely against it because he owned the casino in Jericho, and he was afraid that he would lose his. He also owns 25% of Jericho, and he was afraid that he would lose his casino forever. And but I think the PA would have eventually prevailed, and they were willing to build up this free zone that looks just like Dubai.
Yeah.
And eventually, the Arab countries were going to do that, but in the middle of the whole thing, Hamas came in. So that's why I consider one of the great traitors of Israel to be Ariel Sharon, because the West forced him to give up the settlements in Gaza. Well, what did those settlements have? They had some of the best greenhouses on the face of the earth. And Gaza, aside from the economic inequalities, remember, I was in Israel for 30 years when there were no borders, no fences, no anything. You actually had a de facto one state solution. But in the case of Gaza, because of very high taxes in Israel, prohibitions on gambling, and in Egypt, there's prohibitions on gambling for locals, not for foreigners. So you have casinos in Cairo, but you don't, but not for natives. And because of the great port situation, Hatem Khatib, who's the real line for Palestine guy, the vision was that airport that was built. They had their own airport for a while, and it almost made it. But Hamas came in and destroyed absolutely everything. The greenhouses, the infrastructure, they drove it to the ground. And a lot of people financed Hamas, including certain parties in Israel. It's been a disaster for everybody all the way around. So you would have had your two-state, one-state solution without fences, without walls, but it was not meant to be because of interlopers on all sides. Nothing to do with Arab nationalism. Because by the time Hamas took over, Arab nationalism had basically died. So there was October 7th. I'm afraid that in my lifetime, we will not have any serious discussion as to how October 7th was allowed to happen. There is a vision that, and I think Sheikh Uta out of Toronto says this, that all empires are expansive. There's no question that the UAE and Israel together, they're small. That's why when I look at Israel, I look at the Venetian Republic. Oh, we want to be Sparta. I said, no, you don't. There is nothing great about being Sparta, but there's something quite great about being the Venetian Republic. Well, UAE is a seafaring power. Israel really isn't. They're making deals. And so basically, I think UAE and Israel together would like to emulate the Venetian Republic. Now, this sheik is very candid. He says, look, Israel is small. It needs to expand. Now, when somebody says it needs to expand, that doesn't mean they have a right to expand. Having a right to expand doesn't exist. Having a need to expand can exist. Empires, any ascending power, generally expands. Could we agree on that when they're in the ascent?
Oh, of course.
Well, I want to shoot a question by you. Somebody recently pointed out that there's plenty of African and Far Eastern countries that speak English and French, but there's none of them that speak Russian.
Well, that's why Israel is very lucky, because Israel is protected by Russia, because it is the only Russian-speaking country, because Brighton Beach and Coney Island cannot be called a Russian-speaking country, even though you have probably more Russian speakers in Brooklyn than you do in Israel, although in Israel you certainly have close to 2 million. One of the geniuses of Bibi Netanyahu was that he was able to impress, really it was much more Avigdor Lieberman than it was Bibi, but Avigdor Lieberman and his crowd started the Russian party, Israel Beitenu. And Putin took one look and said, "That's my Russian-speaking country outside of Israel," just like
But
for the English.
I just meant in terms of expansionism. It was an interesting point, and it got me thinking.
All countries expand and all countries retract. Always.
Yeah.
Russia, I think, is going to retract now
Yeah.
at the end of this war.
Yeah, I mean,
Again,
it had previous
countries
expansion.
expand and they retract, and I think Ukraine is going to retract.
Yeah.
Turkey, on the other hand, has a 40% chance of expanding, and it also has a chance of losing. They may lose to the Kurds, but right now the trajectory is that Turkey will probably expand a little bit.
I think so.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's how things
last
work.
night about this very situation, and it's like one guy's like, "Well, if Russia takes this piece of Ukraine now in the last few decades of like thing," I'm like, "Yeah, that's happening. There's nothing that we can do to stop it." And Russia,
but Eastern Europe. But wait a moment, Eastern Ukraine has always been Russian. Well, I mean, no country has always been Russian because Russia hasn't always existed. But as long as it's been Russia, Eastern Ukraine, Ukraine does mean borderlands. Eastern Ukraine was not part of the borderlands. The closer you get to the Dnieper River, the closer you get to the borderlands, and then you have a different ethnic race. So that could be argued that that was not originally Russia, and it wasn't. But to say that Donbass or Lugansk or any of these areas or any place near Rostov-on-Don, this is a Russian ethnic area. And it doesn't really matter because, again, it doesn't matter what the history is. It's a matter of what kind of talent and what kind of forces come together that allow Russia to reclaim that. The fact is, Ukraine was torn away from Russia. Kazakhstan was torn away from Russia. The Baltics were torn away. So if you really want to talk about what was done to Germany with the Diktat of Versailles, it doesn't compare to what the West did to Russia. What the West did to Russia was the greatest plucking of a chicken that has been done, I think, in world history. Rather than Russia imploding by itself, these states were forced, independence was forced on them by the West. I don't think in history have you ever had a situation where what do you call when you violently pluck a chicken? There's a word for it.
A special word for violently plucking a chicken? I do not know that one.
Yeah, that's something I've heard.
That's basically what the West did to Russia. Russia couldn't do anything about it. Now, let's say that finally the U.S. is able to force a settlement.
Yeah, well, Russia couldn't do anything about it because it was impoverished and weakened by the insane Soviet regime.
Yep.
And you know what? Putin has done an amazing job, but they still haven't recovered from the Soviet regime.
Yeah,
I agree.
You have like half the population that they started with.
And I mean, it's amazing. I mean, Russia had the Soviet corruption, and that should have ended. And when Stalin ended, that should have been the end of the Soviet Union. Although I'll admit, I still love the music. I still love the Soviet music, the Soviet art. It's something I will always enjoy. But it should have ended then. Russia today, had the Soviet Union ended sooner, would have a larger population than that of the United States. It was on its way to it. And instead it has 140 million.
Yep.
But again,
you know, 50 million now with the addition of the new territories.
It could actually go up to 170 million. But imagine when it used to be 300, close to 300 million. No, it's a very, and remember that they lost their best lands in Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan. These are the best countries.
I was actually going to ask you, and I think I just got my answer. Do you share my soft spot for Kazakhstan?
Sure. I like all the stats.
Yeah, I
think the stats are the most amazing places.
I can't quite articulate why, but I have a soft spot for the Kazakhs.
A lot of people have that. A lot of people have a soft spot. Most Jews have a big soft spot for the Uzbeks. Uzbek is a very, very popular country among Jews.
Book around here about imperialism in the 19th century, and it's like the Russian foreign minister is writing in his diary, And court was all excited today because General so has conquered Tashkent. Nobody knows where that is.
Well, I don't know that nobody knows where it is, but
Nobody
that's
in the
pretty
Russian
funny.
court knew.
Yeah, I bet that. That was funny.
Uzbekistan.
That was
The
funny.
Russian court didn't even want to speak Russian. Most of the Russian court only spoke French.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, they were interested exclusively on what was going on in Paris and what was going on in Berlin and going on in London. That was what the Russian court was all about.
And that's what that comment was about, which was actually quite funny.
Yep.
And that's still the case for most Russians today. In spite of whatever propaganda they feed you, the majority are still in the West. And that's the story. All right, so let's convene again next week, if we can, around the same time.
Yeah, let's try. Well, actually, the problem is this time is unless money agrees to stay up late, we should maybe try to do it a little earlier.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, we should try. Now, you know, the thing is, I would like to build a brand and get Tom. You know, we're all still part of that alternate media stuff that Luongo and Halsey and all these people have. We need to build up some audience. But I just think that I add something only in two areas that I'm more focused on the Mideast, but in views that people don't generally express, but still go in line very much with what you think, what Tom does about how the world really works.
Yep.
And I think we also need to start looking at Argentina versus Brazil, which is where I am. I mean, Doug Casey would disagree with me a lot, but I think we need to start taking a realistic look at Argentina and why it may actually make it in spite of being a completely foobar economic situation right now.
Oh, yeah, definitely. We should definitely talk about more stuff than just the places that we kind of focused on today.
Well, because there's a lot of movement going on in the Middle East right now. A lot of
The
movement.
reason why we didn't
And
do
it
it
could
earlier
become quite
today is
explosive.
I have something for you, Dave.
right?
Remember last time I asked you to define financialization? I think I have a definition that is a good one that I can give to you. So financialization is when the speculation or financial derivatives of a thing become more important than the thing itself.
That's exactly right. That's what BlackRock is. That's what State Street is. That's what Vanguard is. Blackstone. I mean, they're all kind of. Blackstone is more real estate, but all these huge corporations basically they financialized where the derivatives and the rentier or the rent practice over supersedes any quality of product. Is that what you're basically saying?
Yep. Well, it's when the concerns of the derivatives or the speculation become more important than the concerns, like you said, of the quality of the product itself, or than the central thing itself.
That's why it's called a financialized economy. I think your answer is brilliant.
Yep. So I thought it was a good definition. I liked it. I thought I would give it to you.
Yeah.
Excellent. So we'll check in again next week, and
Yeah.
we'll see where we go from here. Thank you, guys. Have a wonderful day.
Okay.
You too. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Let's see, how do I disconnect?
And bye, JP. Thanks for stopping by. This has been the Spy Guy Friday afternoon, Friday morning-ish panel. We started off a little late today with that because we had it was the holiday, and then someone's like, David's like, "Are we doing this?" I'm like, "Oh, I guess we are." So I drove home and after picking up a roast, and that's why we're here. So if you like this content, I ask everyone to like, share, and subscribe, and start watching some of the old stuff too. We have we're trying to get once a week together with these guys and maybe some other people to have interesting conversations like the one we had today. So just thanks. I'll be sending this out later. Bye bye.